24 years later, and it is still unclear what happened to Jonelle Matthews. Police say no body has ever been found, no suspect ever arrested, but they're not giving up and tell us modern tools, among other things, might help them solve this case.
The nightmare began on a freezing December 20th, 1984. A 12-year-old dropped her shoes by the door, curling up beside a glowing space heater and a glittering holiday tree inside her own living room. Fresh off a joyful choir performance, she felt completely secure. Within 60 agonizing minutes, she vanished off the face of the earth. 35 years of dead ends followed. Detectives found 0 shattered glass, no blood, and neighbors reported absolute, suffocating silence. The only clue left behind was her tiny footwear neatly positioned before a vacant sofa. Outside, winter tracks creeping toward the window, sinister indentations someone frantically clawed away using a yard rake. This was Jonelle Matthews, and the predator who stole her future spent the ensuing 37 years mocking everyone right out in the open. He audaciously launched a gubernatorial campaign, chatted up reporters, and eagerly embedded himself into the exact police probe designed to hunt him down. The most chilling part? His raging narcissism would not let him shut his mouth, weaving a psychological trap that ultimately engineered his own downfall. Before unraveling this horrific crime, we need to look at the victim's life. She was never just cold ink on a police report. She was a vibrant, breathing child. Boisterous, theatrical, and overwhelmingly joyful, she possessed a magnetic energy that instantly illuminated any space she entered. Entering the world on February 9th, 1972, in Santa Barbara, California, her journey kicked off wrapped in profound tragedy. The woman who delivered her, Terry Ver Martinez, was merely 13, a literal middle schooler pushed into motherhood. Following 4 grueling weeks of struggling to cope, Terry made a gut-wrenching sacrifice, surrendering the infant to the foster system. It was an act of pure devotion, breaking her own heart to guarantee the baby had a fighting chance at a decent future. That dream quickly materialized when Jim and Gloria Matthews, a devoted Colorado pair, welcomed her into their home a few weeks later. Joining their older daughter, Jennifer, the household finally felt entirely whole. They settled in Greeley, a sleepy, intensely loyal community roughly 60 miles north of Denver, a quintessential suburb where children roamed free until dusk. Neighbors never bothered bolting their locks, trusting in a sheltered bubble where every face was deeply familiar. It was the absolute last zip code you'd expect a home invasion to swallow a kid whole. Her adoptive dad, Jim, ran Platte Valley Elementary as principal. Gloria held down a job at a neighborhood diner, and both served as pillars at the Sunnyview Church of the Nazarene. Jonelle undeniably served as the chaotic heartbeat of their lives. Peers constantly called her wildly entertaining and fiercely outgoing. Whether dominating religious plays, belting vocals in the chorus, or hosting weekend slumber parties, she soaked up the spotlight. She obsessed over the pop group Menudo, treating minor daily events like blockbuster movie premieres because she lived with total passion. With the holidays rapidly approaching, the 12-year-old was practically vibrating with festive anticipation. Then came December 20th, 1984, 5 days prior to the holiday, when their reality shattered. She had been battling a nasty respiratory bug all week. While any other preteen would have milked the illness to skip class, she absolutely refused. She pleaded with her folks to attend, desperate to pass out seasonal presents before winter break kicked in. Plus, there was something bigger. The Franklin Middle School Honor Choir had tapped her for a solo during their highly anticipated winter gala. Wild horses could not have kept her away from that stage. Jim and Gloria eventually caved, laying down a single, strict ground rule. Return immediately after the final curtain call and get in bed. She swore she would, heading out the door. The performance took place at a regional intra-West Bank facility, carrying enough local prestige to warrant a live broadcast on community television. She belted out festive classics alongside her peers, sharing the risers with her close buddy, Deanna Ross. They harmonized, giggled through the sets, and once the clapping died down, Deanna's dad, Russell, volunteered to chauffeur her back to the house. That quick transit marked the final ordinary sequence of her existence. Around 8:15 in the evening, Russell parked outside 324 3rd Avenue Court. She hopped out of the passenger side, waving farewell to her best friend. Yelling out a cheerful holiday greeting, she marched up the concrete path. From the street, Russell and his daughter kept their eyes locked on her until she crossed the threshold. A second later, the entryway bulb flared to life. It was the classic silent suburban pact assuring adults that their kid made it indoors. That glowing porch fixture translated to being secure and totally fine. Satisfied, Russell hit the gas. He remained blissfully unaware that apart from a cold-blooded murderer, he was the final human to witness the middle schooler breathing. Here is the verified timeline moving forward. Nearing 8:30 at night, the landline rang inside the empty residence, and she picked it up. A faculty member from her dad's district was calling in sick for the following morning. She jotted down the absence note for Jim. A perfectly normal conversation. Zero red flags. Yet that routine chat would be the final time anyone heard Jonelle Matthews breathe. Then, absolute dead air. A sinister window opened inside that residence between 8:30 and 9:30 that night. Whatever went down was lightning fast. Her father, Jim, spent the evening cheering at older sister Jennifer's basketball game. With her mother Gloria miles away nursing an ailing parent, Jim rolled up to their driveway around 9:30. He figured the tween was just chilling inside, either glued to the television or dozing peacefully on the living room sofa. He stepped through the front door. The furnace hummed softly. The TV blared to an empty room, and her beloved shawl rested over the cushions, tossed aside just seconds prior. Her footwear sat neatly aligned by her regular seat, catching the glow of the family's holiday tree. It was a frozen snapshot of domestic life, minus the girl herself. The vents blew hot air. Those abandoned sneakers retained her body heat. Yet the child had vanished into thin air. Jim brushed off the initial dread, assuming she visited a neighbor, and dialed around. Nobody knew a thing. The clock struck 10 when Jennifer finally returned from the gym. She yelled out a casual greeting, only to be met with suffocating silence. Pure panic set in, prompting Jim to dial the local cops. Cruisers swarmed the property within 15 minutes, uncovering a chilling detail in the yard that made their blood run cold. Deep boot tracks marred the freshly fallen snow by the window. A phantom had lurked in the dark, stalking her every move through the glass. These distinct impressions didn't belong to any kid. They were massive, heavy, and undeniably calculated. The most unsettling detail? The intruder grabbed a gardening tool straight from the family's garage to erase their treacherous path. Detectives found 0 smashed locks and absolutely no evidence of a physical brawl indoors. Not a single shattered pane or terrified shriek pierced the neighborhood. The kidnapper operated like a ghost, silent, methodical, and ruthless. Leveraging the household's own equipment to hide their presence proved one terrifying fact. This was no crime of opportunity. A predator had been meticulously casing the joint, biding their time until the 12-year-old was utterly defenseless and isolated. Investigators originally floated the standard narrative that the tween voluntarily fled the premises. Her dad vehemently rejected that theory, pleading with cops that she had far too much going for her to just bolt. She was eagerly anticipating a slumber party the following night, gearing up for a holiday choir solo, and hyped for gifts. What 12-year-old bails on her family just 5 days before Christmas? Authorities tossed her locker and scoured her room. Absolutely 0 clues surfaced. No farewell letter, packed bags, or whispered hints of domestic chaos. When weeks bled by without a single sighting, the voluntary disappearance angle crumbled to dust. Detectives pivoted their crosshairs onto Jim. Spouses and parents are always suspect number 1, a grim reality he fully accepted while complying. He submitted to a polygraph run by the Bureau's most ruthless examiner on the western side of the Mississippi. The Fed bluntly stated he bombed the exam. Desperate to clear his name, Jim demanded a second round with city cops. Put yourself in his shoes. Your little girl is snatched. You're paralyzed with grief, and the supposed heroes peg you as the mastermind. Jim held his ground, repeating his alibi, until authorities officially dropped him as a suspect, leaving them staring at a brick wall. 0 targets, 0 remains. Detectives grasped at straws, even tailing her biological mother, Terry Vera Martinez, for several weeks. The woman was completely clueless that her biological child had even vanished. With 0 contact for over 10 years, that trail went ice cold. Back home, the neighborhood rallied, refusing to let the girl fade into obscurity. Congregations hosted 24-hour prayer vigils, while activists blanketed the entire nation with thousands of bounty flyers. Then, a groundbreaking media campaign forever seared her innocent smile into the American psyche. She cemented a tragic spot in history as one of the pioneer cases slapped onto the side of a dairy jug. Let that sink in. Back in the mid-1980s, we didn't have rapid cell phone alerts or viral online networks. To track down a snatched kid, you plastered their mug across the one item sitting on every kitchen table during morning cereal. Her school portrait haunted grocery aisles nationwide, elevating the grim mystery all the way to the Oval Office. By March 1985, Commander-in-Chief Ronald Reagan delivered a national address tackling the terrifying epidemic of stolen youth. He explicitly dropped her name. The leader of the free world was spotlighting a 12-year-old from rural Colorado, yet the trail stayed dead. Every hotline call proved useless. The investigation froze over completely, dragging agonizingly through 5, then 10 long years. Come 1994, 10 years post-abduction, her shattered parents were forced to sign the harrowing paperwork declaring her legally deceased. Gloria openly confessed the unbearable toll of surviving an entire decade without a shred of closure or motive. A full decade of dead ends and deafening silence. A desperate mother pleading on camera, "Someone has to know the truth. Just give us her remains. Let us lay our little girl to rest." But the world stayed quiet. By May 1985, a twisted sliver of hope emerged. Authorities unearthed part of a torn human scalp on a rural Weld County farm. They actually brought Gloria in to identify it. Put yourself in her shoes, staring down at a mutilated fragment of skin, praying it doesn't belong to the kid you brought into this world. She endured the nightmare because a parent has to. It wasn't her girl. Yet that fleeting sigh of relief was instantly crushed by the hell of ongoing uncertainty. Remaining in Greeley felt like suffocating. The ghost of an empty bedroom, the whispering neighbors, the agonizing lack of closure. The parents had to escape. Jim and Gloria fled to the Philippines for mission work, ultimately seeking refuge down in Costa Rica. Her big sister Jennifer tied the knot and relocated up to Washington State. Yet the mother's hunt never truly ended. She scoured crowds, studying random faces. She confessed that her sleeping hours were haunted by her kid's safe return. Night after night, the exact same vision. Her little girl casually walking through the front entryway, beaming. In the waking world, that door remained sealed shut for 35 agonizing years. Then came July 23, 2019. Pipeline crews are ripping through a barren, isolated patch of dirt out in Weld County, roughly 15 miles southeast of Greeley. A routine excavation shatters when a heavy machine operator unearths a nightmare, human skeletal remains, and a few chilling extras. A severed skull still wearing braces, tangled with rotting scraps of a plaid skirt, a torn blouse, and a sweater vest. The exact outfit the 12-year-old had on the evening she stepped into her living room and vanished off the face of the earth. 48 hours later, the county coroner delivered the crushing reality. It was her. Dental charts and genetic profiling locked it in. But the medical examiner uncovered a dark truth that instantly pivoted a tragic disappearance into a full-blown homicide hunt. A fatal bullet straight to the skull. This kid didn't get lost in the cold. She didn't flee her home. This wasn't some random crime of opportunity from a drifter passing through city limits. A monster marched her out the door, drove her out into the middle of nowhere, executed her point blank, and dumped her in a shallow grave like actual garbage. The skeleton was bundled in a pale bedsheet. Her jacket was half-zipped, shoved inside out, with the sleeves forcefully jammed into the armpits. As detectives pried those sleeves apart, tiny skeletal fingers tumbled into the dirt. She had buried her hands deep into her sides. She was freezing. A terrified middle schooler shivering in a desolate December wasteland, desperately seeking warmth before the flash of the muzzle. Burn that mental picture into your brain. The sheer psychological horror of her final seconds is impossible to shake. For her parents, uncovering the grave delivered a brutally hollow sense of closure. The grieving mother had always clung to a razor-thin fantasy that her baby girl was still breathing out there in the world somewhere. That delusion was violently put to rest. But a much darker mystery took its place, one the town had suppressed for over 3 decades. Who pulled the trigger? Mere weeks following the grim unearthing, local authorities dropped a bombshell that completely paralyzed the city. Detectives locked onto a prime suspect. And we aren't talking about a faceless transient or a petty street crook. This guy was a 2-time political candidate for the governor's mansion. a deeply unhinged figure who spent 30 years granting interviews, drafting manifestos, and flooding courts, with paperwork bizarrely inserting the victim's name into every single move he made. Enter Steven Dana Pankey. The twisted saga of his ultimate downfall goes down as one of the most wildly psychotic webs of evidence in modern investigative history. Flashback to 1984. When the little girl vanished, Pankey was a 33-year-old family man residing right there in Greeley. His front door sat barely 2 miles from the crime scene. They even shared the exact same pews at the Sunnyview Church of the Nazarene. Just 24 hours before the abduction on December 19th, cops had slapped cuffs on him at a community bank for trespassing and unhinged harassment. His sketchy auto dealership had completely tanked, and his bank accounts were in a total freefall. But the timeline immediately following the kidnapping is where the red flags turned downright sinister. His former wife, Angela Hicks, later revealed he stormed into their house and barked that they were fleeing the state. They were hauling out to Big Bear Lake, California, before sunrise to see his folks for the holidays. Angela swore they never discussed this getaway beforehand. It was a frantic, unprompted escape. Yet the truly chilling behavior surfaced during their return trip. Get this. Pankey had essentially outlawed the outside world. No television, no papers, no radio broadcasts. He claimed it kept their household pure and holy. His wife wasn't even permitted behind the wheel. Yet, after abruptly aborting their vacation, he commanded her to crank the dashboard radio. He was absolutely desperate for a local news broadcast. He demanded updates on an abducted child, a kid he'd eventually swear he knew nothing about. Angela testified she surfed the AM dial for hours while her husband sat hyper-fixated, hunting for any whisper of the case. Once they finally rolled back into city limits, instead of pulling into his driveway, he sped to a nearby shop and bought out their entire supply of local papers. Back home, he forced Angela into a twisted psychological ritual, demanding she read every single word regarding the missing girl aloud to him 3 separate times. The madness didn't stop there. Barely a few days after arriving back, he threw on heavy coveralls and rubber boots, violently tearing up the earth right in their front lawn. He fed Angela a blatant lie about a broken septic system, a bizarre excuse considering they had just installed a brand new one months prior. She knew damn well nothing was leaking. Later that exact same week, a junked vehicle sitting on their property erupted into unexplained flames. Stepping into the dark to investigate, Angela stumbled onto a chilling tableau, her husband silently gripping a shovel, bathed in the glow of the burning wreckage. Combine that with an abrupt flight across state lines, a toxic fixation on the missing child coverage, erratic yard excavations, and a randomly torched automobile. Every single red flag detonated within 7 days of a 12-year-old vanishing into thin air. Then, our primary suspect made a move so completely unhinged, no sane killer would ever attempt it. He grabbed the receiver and dialed federal agents directly. Exactly 4 weeks after the abduction, he strolled right into the local police headquarters. Masquerading as an ordained Baptist preacher, he claimed a dark parishioner confession had just dropped the missing girl's fate right into his lap. He bragged about holding the ultimate key to cracking the investigation wide open. The catch? He demanded full legal amnesty before uttering another syllable. Detectives flatly rejected the extortion attempt, but they permanently inked his identity into their files and put a massive target on his back. If this descent into madness is making your skin crawl, smash that like button and subscribe right now. I dive into terrifying true crime investigations, weekly real victims, shattered families, and the hunt for truth. Plus, check the description for even more twisted, unsolved mysteries. Trust me, those deep dives are essential viewing once we wrap this up. Let us dive back into the suspect's mind, because his behavior over the following 30 years charts a course of absolute, unprecedented insanity. Following that brazen stunt at the station, he packed up his household and fled the city completely. The family drifted across state lines before finally planting roots in Twin Falls, Idaho, around the late 1980s. However, the ghost of that little girl followed him everywhere. Out west, he developed a bizarre obsession with holding public office. He launched campaigns for county sheriff 3 separate times, chased a city council seat, and even made dual bids for both governor and lieutenant governor. Voters rejected him miserably every time. By the 2018 Republican primary, he barely scraped up 1.4% of ballots cast. Yet, those failed political aspirations were just a smokescreen. Hiding behind those polished campaign slogans and podium speeches, a deeply disturbed psychology was taking over. He typed relentlessly, drafting unhinged legal motions, attorney correspondence, and wild appeals aimed straight at the Idaho Supreme Court. Buried inside these mountains of paperwork lawsuits entirely unrelated to a vanished Colorado adolescent, he kept inserting erratic, completely unprovoked mentions of his alleged victim. Once authorities finally raided his residence, they uncovered a staggering stockpile of more than 1,000 individual papers referencing her name. 1,000 separate documents. In a 1999 judicial motion, he wildly claimed to the state's highest court that an old criminal conviction was actually a massive government conspiracy to strong-arm him into snitching on the kidnapping. Then, he penned a sentence so terrifying it froze seasoned detectives right in their tracks. He explicitly documented a paralyzing fear that authorities would execute him if he dared to reveal where the victim's remains were buried. Let that sink in for a second. What completely innocent citizen panics about lethal injection for pointing out a makeshift grave unless they dug that exact hole themselves? He even authored a disturbing manuscript. Discovered during the police raid, it bore a chilling title, Graveyards. The pages dripped with venomous rants targeting the local Sunnyview religious congregation. This was the exact sanctuary where the victim's family worshipped, and the very same parish that had excommunicated our suspect before the victims ever walked through their doors. During the late 1990s, he casually admitted to a uniformed officer that he had concealed human remains beneath Colorado dirt. Across multiple sworn affidavits, he effectively branded himself the primary target of a lethal injection homicide probe. He openly labeled himself a crucial eyewitness to the abduction. Yet, nearly every piece of correspondence concluded with one desperate ultimatum: guarantee me full legal immunity. Ink a plea bargain, and I point you to the corpse. Detectives never took the bait, but they recorded every single whisper. Every unhinged threat and bizarre confession went straight into an evidence locker, slowly piecing together a massive prosecution that took decades to detonate in court. You see, he possessed one highly classified detail that solely the actual murderer could comprehend, and he blurted it out for the world to hear. Think back to those winter tracks outside the house. The specific fact that an intruder actively raked over those boot prints? The press never got a hold of that. Detectives intentionally kept it buried in the case file as classified holdback material, a tactical secret designed to weed out false confessions from the true predator. Despite the media blackout, our suspect casually dropped that precise detail during countless conversations with law enforcement. Even worse, his former spouse dug a crumpled yellow legal pad out of the garbage. Scribbled in his own handwriting was a deeply incriminating note. The powder outside the crime scene had been deliberately raked. Eventually, his personal defense counsel conceded that this specific slip-up forged an unbreakable chain to the kidnapping, simply because no innocent civilian could possibly know about the tampered snow. But the rabbit hole goes deeper. A shocking allegation from a blood relative surfaced a dark family secret the suspect fought ruthlessly to keep hidden. While chatting on heavily monitored prison telephone lines, he finally received the news that this very same relative had permanently been silenced by death. Was it guilt? His chilling first reaction was simply asking his sibling if a relative's rumors about him stalking schoolyards would finally vanish. She assured him they probably would, considering that family member was the lone voice pushing those sinister allegations. Investigators later highlighted a terrifying coincidence: that informant resided roughly 3 streets over from Franklin Middle, the exact campus the missing girl attended. Several months following the girl's mysterious vanishing, a local pastor announced to the flock that divine intervention had assured him the missing child was alive and coming back unharmed. The parish clung to that glimmer of hope, bowing their heads in faithful expectation. Yet the suspect leaped to his feet, violently branding the preacher a fraud before being forcibly dragged from the sanctuary. What innocent guy gets that enraged at the mere thought of a child's survival, unless he was the one who ensured she wouldn't? Come October 12, 2020, a local grand jury slapped the man with a massive 8-page criminal indictment. The official accusations? Top-tier homicide and the violent abduction of the young victim. 36 long years of silence were ending. Somebody was finally facing the music for this tragedy. Cops nabbed the 69-year-old in Idaho, denying him bond. This guy spent literally decades begging for immunity, mailing endless notes, campaigning for political spots, and aggressively forcing his way into the middle of a massive manhunt, only to wind up rotting in a cell pending extradition to Colorado. Meanwhile, the victim's parents made the agonizing flight back to town. Sitting inside that courthouse, they stared directly into the accused's eyes, desperately anticipating the closure they had hunted since 1984. The truth. The initial legal battle kicked off in October 2021, but the state faced a massive hurdle. Zero genetic proof, absolutely none. Over 3.5 decades trapped underground had completely degraded any potential biological clues on the victim's clothes. Without a single print or the actual killing tool, prosecutors had to bank everything entirely on the defendant's deeply disturbing psychological track record. Surprisingly, those twisted mind games proved to be incredibly damning. The state paraded about 60 individuals to the stand, painstakingly detailing 40 years of the suspect's downright unhinged, guilt-ridden maneuvers. The weird mail, the endless legal motions, the thousands of strange files hoarded inside his residence, his bizarre knowledge of an unreleased landscaping clue, and those cryptic prison tapes discussing firearms right after discovering how she actually perished. Yet the absolute nail in the coffin came from the person closest to the monster, his former spouse. Taking the oath, she brutally dismantled his facade, exposing that frantic escape to the West Coast, his paranoid fixation on news broadcasts, reading the same clippings repeatedly, those midnight excavations, the torched vehicle. Then she dropped a bombshell revelation regarding a chilling moment from 2008. 24 years post-abduction, the suspect's own boy was killed. While mourning at the service, his ex witnessed him hovering over the ashes, pressing his lips to the urn, quietly begging the heavens that this tragedy wasn't karmic payback for what happened to the missing girl. He actually muttered her exact name. The witness also recalled pulling a crumpled document from their garbage. Scrawled in his distinct penmanship was a hidden detail about raked snow in the yard, clues authorities kept completely secret. All penned by a guy claiming total ignorance. She further revealed his deeply terrifying domestic tyranny. Media blackouts were mandatory, no broadcasts, no print, no tunes allowed inside, and she was forbidden from even getting behind the wheel. But the second that child went missing, every restriction vanished, simply because the killer obsessively craved the public's reaction to his horrific crime. Ironically, the accused practically handed the prosecution their victory. Completely defying his counsel's desperate warnings, he claimed the hot seat, launching into 48 hours of absolutely chaotic, hypocritical rants that utterly stunned his own defense team. He flat out confessed to weaving an intricate web of deceit for decades. That elaborate tale involving an officer and a corpse? Total fiction. The supposed religious admission? Entirely fabricated. His endless brags about possessing insider knowledge were nothing but spiteful fantasies. Sworn under oath, he blamed his chronic dishonesty on petty grievances regarding his past treatment by local authorities and neighbors. It was basically his arrogant way of dodging accountability, blaming it on pure malice. His entire strategy boiled down to, sure, I'm a con artist. I have spun tales for 37 years, but trust me this time. Naturally, the lead prosecutor refused to swallow that garbage. Staring dead into the predator's soul, he brutally demanded to know if the victim pleaded for mercy before he pulled the trigger. The room fell dead silent. Even the defense's closing argument brutally conceded that their client was an absolute creep, noting that being wildly unlikable does not automatically equal homicide. Ultimately, the panel debated but hit a massive wall. They only managed to nail him on one measly charge for lying to the cops, a deadlocked jury, a shocking mistrial. For the shattered Matthews family, justice had just slipped through their fingers again, but the state refused to back down. Round 2 was locked in for October 2022. This time, investigators held a devastating trump card, a shadow witness named Patrick Callis, locked up right alongside the suspect in the Weld County lockup. From January to April 2021, the two men shared the same highly guarded cell block. Behind bars, they forged an intense religious connection, diving deeply into scripture and prayer, though Pankey kept his lips tightly sealed about his pending charges. Until the moment his guilt became too heavy, he pulled Callis aside, desperate for absolution, begging to pray. As they bowed their heads, Pankey whispered that he had committed unspeakable acts. When pressed if it was about the missing girl, a silent nod confirmed the darkest truth. When directly asked if he was the murderer, his chilling response was that only the Almighty knew. Yet, the confessions didn't stop there. The informant later took the stand, recalling how a fellow prisoner frantically banged on the concrete wall, urging him to eavesdrop. Creeping up to the glass partition, Callis caught a horrifying admission, a phrase no falsely accused person would dare utter. "She was lifeless before I ever crossed those tracks." Following the initial botched trial, Callis finally penned a desperate letter to prosecutors. He confessed that their deep religious ties had originally bound him to a pact of silence. The guilt of perceived betrayal ate at him, but watching a killer potentially walk free shattered his resolve. He could no longer hide the truth. On October 31st, 2022, fittingly, Halloween, the jurors emerged with their final decision. A sweeping conviction: felony homicide, armed kidnapping in the second degree, and lying to law enforcement. While he dodged the calculated first-degree homicide charge, the resulting penalty remained practically identical. A permanent cell assignment, though parole could be on the table after 2 decades, pushing his earliest exit to 2042. By then, he would be 91. Right before the gavel fell, the grieving relatives finally took the floor. Jennifer Mogensen, the older sibling, addressed the gallery, noting the harrowing 12,634 sunrises since her sister vanished. She painted a tragic picture of a stolen future, a husband robbed of a sister-in-law, a child deprived of their aunt. Their petty 1984 childhood squabbles were violently denied the chance to mature into a lifelong bond. This monster took all of that. Next was the father, Jim, whose subsequent words to the convicted predator brought an absolute chilling hush over the room. Staring into the eyes of his child's butcher, he stated that the killer's dark obsession and own tortured mind refused to grant him peace. The predator had become trapped in his own psychological cage. Then, Jim delivered an unimaginable twist. He challenged the killer's supposed faith, offering a sliver of redemption and urging him to finally come entirely clean. A plea for a corrupted soul, insisting salvation remained possible, and that divine judgment was patiently standing by. It was an unbelievable display of mercy from a destroyed parent. The mother, Gloria, however, harbored zero such leniency. Speaking to the media post-sentencing, she firmly declared her absolute inability to pardon the horrific slaughter of her child. She labeled his actions pure wickedness, leaving judgment strictly to a higher power. When the murderer finally addressed the room, he doubled down on his religious facade. He proclaimed his ultimate salvation and absolute innocence, claiming the verdict was a sham. Fast forward to the present moment. The convicted man remains locked away deep inside the Arkansas Valley Correctional Facility in Ordway, Colorado. He is actively plotting an appeal, stubbornly clinging to his lies, but those 12,634 days of agonizing mystery have ended. The lingering ghost of this tragedy is no longer just an unsolved puzzle or a faded photograph on a milk carton. She was a cherished soul, violently snatched away, but ultimately returned. It required 35 agonizing years to locate her remains and 37 to secure a conviction. Yet, her bloodline refused to surrender, and the tight-knit community of Greeley, Colorado, never abandoned the memory of the child stolen 5 days before the holidays. Just 12 years old, with a profound passion for performing in her choir, she adored the festive season and cherished her loved ones, robbed of a life she rightfully earned. So, what is your take on this twisted saga? Weighing all the dark facts, did the panel make the right call, sending a man away without a single drop of physical forensics? Was that prison yard admission the genuine article, or just a desperate snitch manipulating the system? But this is the riddle that truly keeps me up at night. Had this monster just swallowed his pride and stayed silent all those years, would he have completely beaten the system? Sound off with your theories down below. Stay tuned for the next deep dive. The tragic case of Jonelle Matthews serves as a haunting reminder that while evil may strike in the shadows, the light of truth is relentless. Her story offers a profound lesson on the endurance of love and the inevitable self-destruction of darkness. For 35 years, Jonelle was a face on a milk carton, a ghost in a sleepy Colorado suburb. Yet, her family's refusal to surrender proves that a child's memory is more powerful than any shallow grave. Their journey teaches us that justice is not always swift, but it is necessary for the soul to find peace. Perhaps the most chilling educational takeaway is the psychology of the predator. Steven Pankey's downfall was not engineered by DNA, but by his own narcissism, his inability to remain silent, his obsessive need to mock the investigation and insert himself into the narrative, reveals that guilt often wears a mask of arrogance. It is a stark warning. The truth has a way of breathing even when buried. We must honor Jonelle's legacy by staying vigilant and fiercely protecting the innocence of our youth. Let this be a call to action. Never underestimate the power of a community that refuses to forget. Justice for Jonelle is a victory for every family still waiting in the silence.